They called him the Sun King, Louis XIV, the man who made France shine brighter than any other kingdom on earth. For over 70 years, he ruled with absolute power, dazzling Europe with his grandeur, his wars, his palaces, and his ego. But what the world didn't see was how this godlike king, who believed himself chosen by heaven, would die a slow, agonizing death that stripped him of all his glory, leaving only a rotting body and terrified servants praying for the nightmare to end. It all began in the summer of 1715. Louis XIV was 76 years old, ancient by the standards of his time, but still dressed like a god. Golden wigs, crimson velvet, and glittering jewels. Versailles, his palace, was at its peak, a golden cage of beauty, vanity, and secrets. Every morning, hundreds of courtiers watched him wake up, dress, and eat, just to stay in his favor. He was the sun, and they were planets orbiting his will. But behind that radiant illusion, the king's body was quietly betraying him. Louis had lived a life of excess, endless feasts, women, wine, and the stress of ruling a continent constantly at war. Decades of infections, gout, and bloodletting had weakened his once vigorous frame. And then it began. A small, dark spot appeared on his left leg, just below the knee. No one thought much of it. The doctors dismissed it as a bruise or an insect bite. But within days, the king began to limp. Within weeks, the pain became unbearable. The spot turned black. The court physicians rushed to his side, men with powdered wigs and self-importance bigger than their knowledge. They poked, pressed, and argued while the king gritted his teeth. As the days passed, the black patch spread, oozing and stinking. Louis, the most powerful man in Europe, was slowly being eaten alive by gangrene. He tried to continue his rituals, rising at dawn, holding council, dining in splendor, but the agony was constant. His courtiers whispered behind their fans. The king, who had built Versailles to display his immortality, now limped through its marble halls with death following close behind. And in Versailles, death was not welcome. The king's illness was kept secret. No one was to speak of it publicly. Louis himself insisted he was merely unwell. He smiled for the crowds and gave orders as usual. But the smell, the smell betrayed him. Witnesses later described it as a sickly sweetness mixed with rot, seeping from under his clothes. Servants fainted from the stench during his daily ceremonies. Still, the king endured. For 72 years, Louis had been obeyed by all of France. He had fought wars, survived rebellions, and outlived his sons and grandsons. He believed he was chosen by God himself. Surely, he thought, no disease could defeat the Sun King. But nature doesn't bow to kings. By late August, the pain was unbearable. The leg had turned completely black, swollen like a log, with flesh peeling off in sheets. His doctors tried everything they knew: leeches, poultices, herbal baths. Nothing worked. Finally, one of them, desperate to look useful, suggested something horrifying. They could amputate the leg. The king refused, said a king of France does not die like a common soldier. He knew the surgery would kill him faster, so he chose to face death in his bed. Surrounded by the golden mirrors of Versailles, the same mirrors that had reflected his triumphs, his lovers, his pride. As his body decayed, the court around him began to shift like vultures. Ambitious nobles whispered in corridors. Ministers plotted their next move. Everyone wanted to know, who will rule next? Louis? Only surviving heir was a 5-year-old great-grandson, the future Louis XV. The king's sons and grandsons were already dead, taken by smallpox, measles, or their own arrogance. Louis XIV's bloodline was dying out before his eyes, and he knew it. On August 25, 1715, the king summoned his doctors, confessors, and closest servants. He could barely speak from the pain, but he remained composed. "Gentlemen," he whispered, "why do you weep? Did you think I was immortal?" It was the first time anyone had heard the Sun King speak of death. For the next few days, his bedchamber became a theater of horror. Hundreds of courtiers packed the room, pretending to mourn but secretly watching the end of an era. The king's leg oozed black liquid. Flies swarmed around the bed despite the perfumed air. He screamed in pain as priests prayed, and doctors argued over whether to cut deeper into the rotting flesh. Some accounts say the skin came off in strips when they tried to bandage him, and yet he remained conscious. He even apologized to his servants for the stench. As his body decayed, his mind turned toward God. He ordered daily masses, confessed his sins, and urged his great-grandson, the little Dauphin, to rule with kindness, not vanity. "Do not imitate me in my love of war," he said. "I've loved it too much." Those words shocked everyone. The Sun King, who had spent half his reign in battle, who had bankrupted France to build Versailles and wage wars for glory, was admitting he had been wrong. It was the first and last time he spoke humbly. By the end of August, the doctors admitted defeat. The gangrene had spread through his entire leg and was moving toward his stomach. His heart raced, his pulse weakened. The sun was setting. On September 1st, 1715, after 72 years on the throne, Louis XIV died. Gasping for breath, his body blackened and foul-smelling, his attendants closed the curtains, snuffed the candles, and wept, or pretended to. Outside, a thunderstorm broke over Versailles. Rain poured down the marble terraces as if the heavens themselves were cleansing the palace of its king. But death wasn't the end of the horror. According to royal tradition, Louis's body was to be embalmed, prepared for display and burial at Saint Denis, the resting place of French kings. The surgeons opened his chest, removing his heart and organs. When they cut into the leg, the stench was so unbearable that several fainted on the spot. One chronicler wrote, "The odor of corruption was beyond imagination. It filled every corridor of the palace. The heart was placed in a golden urn, the body wrapped in linen, soaked with perfumes. But even then, the smell couldn't be contained." As the coffin was carried through the streets of Paris, citizens cheered and laughed. The people who once bowed before him now mocked his death. After decades of taxes, famine, and wars, they were glad the tyrant was gone. And yet, for all the hatred, the legend of Louis XIV only grew stronger. He had reigned longer than any other monarch in European history, 7 decades of absolute rule. He had turned a kingdom into a theater of power, and himself into a living god. But in the end, even gods rot like men. The Sun King's funeral procession was long and grand. It was filled with priests, guards, and nobles walking beside the golden coffin. Yet few tears were sincere. Versailles, once the center of the world, fell into silence. His courtiers now whispered the name of the child who would inherit the throne. Louis XV, a frightened boy who would rule a kingdom on the edge of collapse. There was one final twist to the story, a scandal that followed his death for centuries. Louis XIV's heart, sealed in a golden urn, was placed in a chapel. But years later, during the chaos of the French Revolution, mobs raided royal tombs, smashing coffins and scattering bones. The heart of the Sun King vanished, stolen, sold, and passed through hands like a cursed relic. Legend says it eventually ended up in the possession of an English aristocrat who, in a bizarre act of fascination, ate a piece of it, believing he would absorb the king's power. Whether true or myth, it perfectly captured the strange magic Louis XIV had over people, even in death. The Sun King's body, meanwhile, was reduced to dust. Versailles continued on, glittering, beautiful, empty. The courtiers found new masters. The wars continued. Luxury endured. But the spirit that had once filled France with awe and terror was gone forever. Historians still debate whether Louis XIV was a genius or a monster. He brought art, architecture, and fashion to heights never seen before, but also crushed his people under taxes and war. He declared, "I am the state." And for 7 decades, that was true. But the final lesson of his death is cruelly simple. No matter how powerful, how worshipped, or how divine a man may seem, time humbles everyone. The Sun King, who ruled like a god, died like a man alone, in agony, consumed by his own flesh. His golden palaces couldn't save him. His doctors couldn't cure him. His titles meant nothing. All that remained was a legend, a story of how the brightest sun in France's history set in darkness. Perhaps that's the greatest scandal of all.
If you enjoyed diving into this strange, scandalous corner of history, make sure to unlock more secrets with us here at Throne of Scandals. Hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss a story hidden behind the golden doors of the past, because history is full of mysteries.